what the physics is showing is that we are in a virtual reality. We're in a simulated experience. Or Stephen Hawking, before he died, this was his last quest. He wanted to know if we are living in what he called a base reality. Is this the reality, or are we a spinoff of a base reality that's happening somewhere else? As Nick Bostrom, 2001, put together the first algorithm, plugged in a lot of variables, and to determine what are the odds that this is a virtual reality. And the bottom line is the odds are much greater than not that we are living in a simulated reality. Our physics actually makes more sense. There's not much to us. We're pretty much, when I say we're empty beings, I don't mean that from a spiritual perspective, but when you look at an atom is mostly empty space. And that's what we are, a lot of empty space in those atoms. One of the amazing experiments that was done early in the 20th century was called the double slit experiment. I know many of our viewers are probably familiar with this. What they found was that a particle will behave differently when it's being observed and when it's not being observed. If it's not being observed, it is a wave of energy. When it's being observed, it collapses into a particle of reality. In the simulation theory, this is fascinating, Andre, because as a computer scientist, I know this. When you're building a big simulation, it takes so much memory in the computer to hold the entire simulation present when you're not using all the simulation. So what happens, if you got a computer game, when your avatar opens the door to a room, it's only when they open the door to that room that the room appears, because it would take so much memory to always have that room sitting there if nobody's using it. That appears to be the way our world works. This is what the double slit experiment was showing. If nobody is looking, it's pure energy.
And also just the Nobel Prize recently for local realism being proof false.
Exactly, yeah, the Nobel Prize for this. And now, the whole point of the simulation theory, and what's important for me and where it ties into the indigenous traditions that you're talking about, as a former computer scientist, I'm not actively doing it now. My job was pattern recognition software as a senior computer systems designer during the Cold War years. And one of the amazing things that we found in terms of simulations is that they run on cycles. So you have a simulation, and then what's happening in the simulation are sub-programs that are running these cycles that reset themselves to keep the simulation going. It was about the time of the end of the Cold War in the early 90s when the concept of fractal mathematics, and the Mandelbrot set was an example of the fractal mathematics, really came into vogue. And the interesting thing, if you bring up one of those you can go on, you can Google it and it'll bring up a little model where it just keeps zooming in forever and ever and ever into the fractal. The way that works is that there is a very simple formula that is set up where the answer becomes the input for the next iteration. And all you do is you bump up maybe one, you increment by one, feed that back into the equation, and now that's giving you a new image, and you're doing it through a computer. It keeps things going. We appear to be living in something like that. We know that nature, as complex as it looks, is actually very simple. And it's based on just a few fundamental patterns that our ancestors called the Platonic solids, for example. And all of nature is based on those Platonic solids. And we know that our world is holographic, that the whole is reflected in every piece. We know that it is entangled. There was a Nobel Prize for entanglement that was just awarded a couple of years ago. And we know that it is fractal. And what that means is there's just a few patterns that are feeding into this equation, this iterative equation, on different scales. So, for example, you look at an atom. An atom, the old model of an atom was there's a nucleus and some electrons moving around. It looks a whole lot like a solar system with a sun and some planets moving around. It looks a whole lot like a galaxy with a black hole and or universe and galaxies moving around it. It's the same pattern, just different scale. And this is the way a simulation will work. This is the way our world would work. What our ancestors told us is every once in a while, we go through what we would call a reset. And I think that was the 2012 phenomenon, was identifying that in the Mayan calendar. What makes this really interesting, a lot of people don't know this, is 2012 was not the reset. 2012 marked the end of a cosmic relationship, an alignment with the ecliptic of our solar system and the sun and the Milky Way. But you don't stop a cycle on a dime. You don't stop it at noon, on December 21st. There's a buffer, a window where you phase from one to another. And there's a mathematical formula that tells you how long that window is. For 2012, it's a 36-year-long window, 18 years before 2012, 18 years after. 2030 is the end of that 2012 cycle. It's when we actually move into a new world. Now, the Mayans told us, they said, you're not going to recognize your world. You won't recognize yourself. You won't recognize your land any longer. And everybody said, ha, 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 And now it's hard to recognize our world. Our boundaries are changing. Our borders are changing. Our nations are changing. And we're changing. And 2030 happens to be the year that the UN has targeted for come hell or high water. They want those sustainable development goals in that year. Why that year? Why not 2035, or not? Why not 2028 or 2029? They're on, and World Economic Forum is targeted 2030. And so many people are looking at 2030 as something is incoming in the year 2030, and the powers that be are jockeying for position of control and power before that something occurs. And I think the Mayan calendar is giving us insight into what that is that we can expect, as well as the Hindu traditions. We're definitely in the Kali Yuga and different phases of the Kali Yuga. I was with some of the Native North American traditions as well. The Hopi prophecy rock shows us we have had two great shakings in our past. They call the First and Second World War. There's a point on their petroglyph timeline that we have now passed, and in front of us lies a third great shaking. And when I have asked the elders in the past, I said, what does that mean? What is the shaking? Does that mean a war? And they said, we don't know. They said it's a shift, but we don't know for sure what that will mean. When I'm in the Yucatan and I talk to the Mayan elders and we look at the Mayan calendar, it shows 4 worlds before ours, 5,000-year cycles. And then the 5th world is that face right in the center. Each of those 4 worlds has a petroglyph that describes how that world ended. So there was a world that ended in wind, and one that ended in fire, one that ended in ice, and one that ended in a flood. And I say, okay, the petroglyph in the middle, that face, how's this world end? And they said, that is the petroglyph for movement. And I said, what does that mean? And they said, we don't know. I said, are you talking about, like, does the earth move, or is there a shift in the land? They said it could be a movement of consciousness. It could be a movement of people, a migration. It could be a movement of the earth. We don't know. We just know that that is the petroglyph for movement. They're very honest about that. So those traditions, they're all pointing to sometime in our very near future as being some kind of an energetic reset. And this is part of the bigger conversation. If we are in a simulation, it makes sense that every once in a while we would go through some kind of a reset. Not the end, just a change. And I think what we're all learning is by being the best version of ourselves, by accessing our divinity, celebrating our divinity, our imagination, our creativity. I use this word a lot, the deep truth of what it means to be human. Our healing, our love, our forgiveness, all of those qualities. By doing that, we are prepared for that reset whenever it happens, rather than being afraid of the reset and trying to defend against or some way. There are scientists now that believe they can stop the reset. They want to change. There are proposals right now, because we have the technology. They want to change the orbit of our planet to shift our relationship to the sun and the center of the Milky Way so that we shift our relationship to time. In my opinion, there's some things we shouldn't mess with. Okay, human genome is one of those, and the orbit of Earth in space.
That's wild.
Well, it is wild, but it's an example. It's insane, Andre. It's like kids playing with toys. They unlock just enough of the mystery to be able to tweak that mystery without thinking it through, without thinking through what are the consequences. Is this a responsible thing to do? Is it a moral thing to do? Do we have the right to do this? And this is where I come to blows with some of my scientific friends, because I believe that there is a moral imperative to preserve our humanness and to preserve the planet. To preserve the planet just because we can doesn't mean we should.